They say King Obodio's palace was built on bones. At first, it sounded like just another village tale meant to scare children, but I never believed it until the night I saw the truth with my own eyes. It had been raining all evening, and the sound of thunder echoed through the valley. The night felt different, heavier somehow. The streets of our village were unusually quiet, except for the distant patter of rain and the occasional cry of an owl. But my family's silence was the loudest of all. My little brother, Teo, was gone. Earlier that day, the king's guards had come, their spears gleaming despite the dull skies. They announced they needed young workers for the palace. No one dared argue, no one dared resist. When they reached our home and pointed at Teo, my mother fell to her knees. "Please," she begged. "He's too small. He can't walk." The guards didn't care. One of them grabbed Teo by the arm and dragged him out. His cries faded as they disappeared down the road. My mother's sobs filled the air, but we couldn't do anything. No one could stand up to the king. I couldn't just sit there. Teo was only 8. How could I let him be taken? I waited until the rain came. It was the only cover I had. Wrapping myself in a torn shawl, I slipped out of the house. The road to the palace was muddy and uneven, but I didn't stop. The closer I got, the darker it seemed. The palace wasn't just big, it loomed like a monster, its jagged towers reaching into the stormy sky. They say King Obodio was cursed. Animals avoided the palace grounds, and even the crops closest to the walls refused to grow. People whispered that he made deals with forces no one should ever disturb. But these were just stories. One day, as I approached the palace walls, I heard something strange. It wasn't the sound of guards or workers. It was a low hum, deep and steady, like a song from another world. It made the hair on my arm stand up. I almost turned back, but then I heard it, Teo's voice, crying. My heart raced. I pressed myself against the cold stone walls, searching for a way in. That's when I saw it, a section of the wall that had crumbled. I squeezed through, careful not to make a sound. Inside, the air was damp and smelled like wet earth mixed with something metallic. The corridors were dimly lit with flickering torches, casting long, eerie shadows. The hum grew louder with each step. At the end of the hallway, I found a large room. The sight froze me in my tracks. The floor wasn't just dirt, it was filled with bones. Some were buried deep, but others stuck out like jagged stones. Skulls, ribs, spines, all mixed with the soil. My stomach churned, and I had to hold back the urge to run. In the center of the room was a pit, wide and deep, surrounded by torches that burned with an unnatural greenish light. The hum was coming from the pit, and standing beside it was the king himself. King Obodio was tall and cloaked in dark robes. He held a staff carved with symbols I didn't recognize. He was chanting in a voice that didn't sound human. It was low, guttural, and echoed unnaturally through the room. As he chanted, the dirt around the pit seemed to move on its own, riding like it was alive. Inside the pit, I saw them, children. Dozens of them, digging with their bare hands. Their faces were pale and sunken, their clothes torn and muddy. My eyes scanned the group until I found him, Teo. He was shivering, his hands bloody from clawing at the earth. I wanted to scream, but fear kept me silent. I crouched behind a broken pillar, trying to figure out what to do. That's when the king raised his staff, and the ground shook violently. A crack appeared in the pit, and something began to emerge. At first, I thought it was a statue. But as it rose higher, I realized it was something else entirely. It had too many arms, and its face was twisted, almost insect-like. Just looking at it made my chest tighten, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The king's chant grew louder, and the children screamed. I couldn't watch any longer. Grabbing a loose stone from the floor, I threw it with all my strength. It struck the king on the shoulder, breaking his concentration. The ground stopped shaking, and the humming ceased. The children froze, unsure of what was happening. The king turned, his face twisted in rage. "Who dares interrupt me?" he roared, his voice booming like thunder. I didn't wait for him to find me. I ran to the pit and grabbed Teo's hand. "Run!" I shouted. The other children followed, their movement slow and unsteady, but desperate. Behind us, the king screamed words I couldn't understand, and the hum started again, fainter this time. We stumbled through the palace halls, dodging guards and slipping through the same broken wall I had entered. Rain poured over us as we ran into the forest. Some of the children couldn't keep up, their legs too weak to carry them far. The guards caught them, dragging them back toward the palace. I held Teo tightly, promising myself I wouldn't let him go. We ran until the palace was far behind us, and the hum faded into the night. We never spoke of what happened that night. The village knew something had changed, but no one dared confront the king. We left soon after, moving to a town far away. Sometimes, though, when it rains, I still hear that hum. It's faint, but it's there, a reminder of the horrors beneath King Obodio's palace. And I know, deep down, that whatever the king was feeding in that pit, it's still waiting. Lived it, until I saw them with my own eyes.